This story isn't here to judge anyone, and it's not here to make us feel good watching someone pay a price. It starts with a moment that cuts fast and deep. A door slamming. Rain pouring down. A father shouting words that should never be said to a child. At 15, he was told to get out because of a lie his sister told, and he walked straight into a storm with nothing but a backpack and fear. 3 hours later, the police called. And in that silence on the other end of the line, a truth finally caught up with denial. We don't need to rush to conclusions. We just need to listen. Because this isn't only a story about that night. It's about what builds quietly before it, and what follows long after. About how families fracture, how silence becomes dangerous, and how some moments feel like the end of everything until time reveals they were the beginning of something else. Let's step into this story together. Not to point fingers, but to understand what happens when love fails and what it takes to survive the storm that follows. My name is Riven Knox, and I've kept this story locked behind my ribs for a long time. If you've ever been the kid nobody believed, if you've ever been blamed just because it was convenient, I think you'll understand why my voice shakes even saying this out loud. Before I tell you everything, I just want to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. Sometimes knowing someone is listening makes the difference between falling apart and making it through. And if you can hit subscribe, because I share the kind of stories people survive in silence, and your support is how I keep them from swallowing me whole. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. And when I say everything, I mean the part I've spent 15 years pretending doesn't still live in my body. I'm 30 now. Chicago address, Chicago, pace, Chicago paycheck. I'm the guy coworkers describe as steady, reliable, the one who never panics. I have a job that looks clean on paper, a routine that keeps my head quiet, a fridge that's always stocked because nobody can yank the floor out from under me anymore. From the outside, it's the kind of life people call fine. But there's a difference between fine and healed, and I've always known exactly where the crack is. I don't talk about my family. I don't even say their names out loud unless I have to. I can go months without thinking about West Virginia, without thinking about that house, without thinking about the way my father's voice sounded when he decided I wasn't his problem anymore. Until it rains. Rain in Chicago isn't gentle. It's relentless, metallic, loud enough to make the L tracks sing, and the streetlights smear into gold on the glass. It's a sound that doesn't ask permission. It pushes itself into your apartment and finds every old room you boarded up inside your head. That night, October, the storm. The shove, the click of the deadbolt rain is the shortcut that gets me there in half a second. I was standing at my window watching it slide down the pane like a slow leak when my phone buzzed. Mavis Calder, my grandmother. I hadn't even realized how late it was until I heard the tired calm in her breathing. She doesn't call to chat. Not like that. Her voice was steady, but there was a carefulness in it I recognized from when she used to tell me hard things with soft hands. Z, she said, and she's one of the only people on earth who still calls me that, without it sounding like a joke. A letter came for you today. The word letter did something to my throat. Nobody mails me anything except banks and insurance companies. To my house, she added, like she knew the next question before I asked it. Addressed to you. Handwriting's unsteady. I kept my eyes on the rain so I wouldn't have to picture her kitchen and the way she'd be holding the envelope like it might bite. Why would it go to you? I asked. I've been in Chicago for years. She didn't answer right away. I heard a small sound paper shifting, maybe the envelope in her hand, and then she said, because whoever sent it wanted you to open it there. That was the first time my stomach dropped. Not because of what the letter might say. Because of what it might be trying to avoid. Who sent it I already knew, but I needed her to say it. She exhaled once, controlled. Gideon, she said. She never calls him your father. She calls him Gideon like he's a weather system you track, not a man you love. It's from a care center in Ohio County, Cedar Grove. I felt the room tilt just slightly, like the floor remembered before my mind did. Gideon Knox, Cedar Grove Care Center. The kind of place where time doesn't pass, it drains. He wants what I said, and my voice came out sharper than I meant. He wants to see you, she said. He says he's not got much left. The rain hit the window harder as if it had an opinion. I swallowed tasted old metal. Send me a picture, I said, but I hated myself for it immediately, like I was asking for proof that a ghost was real. No, Mavis said. You need to read it, not zoom in on it. Come this weekend, or I can forward it if you can't. She didn't say the part she didn't have to, if you can't handle being back here. I'll come, I heard myself say, and I wasn't sure if it was courage or reflex. Mavis didn't push. She never pushes. All right, she said. I'll put it on the table. The same place. After we hung up, I stood there with my phone still in my hand, staring at the rain like it was a screen playing the same scene on repeat. I told myself it was just a letter. Ink on paper. A man trying to ease his conscience, but my body didn't believe that. My shoulders were tight. My jaw was locked. My skin had that prickling sensation like something was about to hit me and I didn't know from what angle. I slept maybe 2 hours. In the morning, I did what I always do when I don't want to feel something. I worked. Meetings, emails, a lunch I didn't taste. And all day under the surface of my normal life, one thought kept scraping. He found a way around me. He didn't write to my Chicago address because he didn't want my response to be official. He didn't want a record, or someone else didn't. I drove down Friday night. The city turned into highway turned into hills, and the sky stayed the color of wet concrete the whole way. By the time I hit Lewisburg, the rain had followed me like a dog that didn't forget. Mavis's porch light was on warm and stubborn. The house looked the same as it always had, small, solid, unimpressed by drama. When I stepped inside, the smell hit first coffee lemon cleaner and that faint sweetness of cinnamon she puts in everything, like she's trying to keep the world from going bitter. She didn't hug me right away. She looked at my face like she was reading it. Then she touched my cheek once, quick, like checking a fever. You're thinner, she said. Work, I lied. She nodded like she'd let me have the lie because tonight wasn't about my diet. It's there, she said, and she didn't point because she didn't need to. Her kitchen table has been the center of every real conversation in my life. The envelope was plain cheap, the kind facilities use when they don't want to spend money on dignity. The handwriting on the front was shaky, the letters uneven, like someone had to fight their own hand to make it obey. My name was spelled right. That alone made my chest tighten. The return address read Cedar Grove Care Center, and under it Gideon Knox, like he still had the right to sign that name next to mine. There was a date stamp too, and it was recent enough to make my skin go cold. I didn't open it right away. I did what I always do when I'm scared. I cataloged facts. Paper quality. Smell, stamp, postmark. There was a faint institutional odor, disinfectant, and something underneath it that felt like endings. Mavis sat across from me, hands folded, silent. No advice, no speeches. Just presence. I slid my finger under the flap and tore it open. Inside was one sheet of thin paper, creased, the ink slightly smeared in spots where the pen must have paused too long. The first line wasn't poetic. It wasn't even polished. It was the kind of sentence people write when they've lost the energy to pretend. Riven. I don't deserve to write this. I don't deserve to ask you for anything. But I'm asking anyway. I had a stroke. My left side doesn't work right. I'm at Cedar Grove now. I don't have much time and I can't carry this into the ground without saying it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the night I threw you out. I'm sorry I believed a lie because it was easier than being your father. I'm sorry I made you walk into a storm like you were disposable. My eyes caught on the words and refused to move. Threw you out. Like he was naming it finally, not dressing it up as discipline or tough love. He wrote about the storm, about the police call, about hearing the words hypothermia and unconscious and realizing he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. He wrote about how he wakes up when it rains. How his body remembers even if he tries not to. Then the line that made my fingers go numb hit me like a slap. Blair came to see me last week. I wouldn't let them bring her in. I told them to send her away. I can't look at her face anymore. I can't hear her voice without seeing what I did because I trusted her. I read that twice. Then a third time because my brain kept rejecting it like a wrong answer on a test. The golden child turned away at the door. The one he chose finally refused. Too late. Too late and still, somehow, relevant. Gideon kept writing. He said Cynthia was gone, that the house was sold, that everything he thought mattered had melted away. He said he wasn't asking to be forgiven. He said he just wanted to see me once, to say the words out loud to the person he said them about, not to a nurse, not to a ceiling, not to God. Then near the end, he wrote something that didn't belong in a simple apology. It was one sentence tucked in like an afterthought, like he couldn't decide if he should say it, but couldn't stop himself. I should have protected what your mother left you. I should have stopped it before anyone tried to touch your trust. I didn't understand what I was looking at until it was almost gone. My breath caught. The room seemed to sharpen around the edges. Mavis's kitchen clock ticked like it was counting down. I looked up and met her eyes. She didn't look surprised. She looked like she'd been waiting for that line. He mentioned the trust, I said, and my voice sounded far away. He did, she replied quietly. And that's why it came here. I stared at the envelope again, not to my address, to hers. A place tied to court papers, old restrictions, old orders. Like somebody didn't want this letter to cross certain lines, or like somebody was making sure it did. I lowered the page and watched the rain drag itself down Mavis's window like it was trying to get inside too. In my chest, something old started to wake up, not sadness, not anger, awareness. If Gideon was finally writing about the trust, then he was either trying to confess to something bigger than abandonment, or he was trying to warn me. And either way, it meant the story I thought ended in a courtroom 15 years ago still had a loose thread. I folded the letter carefully, the way you fold something you don't want to tear even if you hate what it says. If I go, I said more to myself than to Mavis, I'm not going to reunite with him. Mavis nodded once. I know. I'm going to close a file, I said. I'm going to close it properly. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine firm. Then you'll have to start at the beginning, she said. And the rain answered for her harder now, like it wanted to push me backward through time. Because the truth is that storm didn't start in October. It started the day my mother died, the day the house went quiet, and my sister learned what power looks like when nobody's watching. In Briar Hollow, grief didn't arrive like a dramatic scene. It seeped in. It changed the air first. The smell of my mom's shampoo vanished from the hallway. The music she played on Sunday mornings stopped. The kitchen stopped producing warmth and started producing noise, microwaves, canned soup plates set down too hard. My mother died when I was 10. The town said the right things. Casseroles appeared. People from church hugged us until my ribs hurt. And then, like they always do, they went back to their lives. Inside our house, the lights still turned on, the bills still got paid, but something essential unplugged. My father didn't fall apart in a way that looked like heartbreak. He fell apart like a machine that lost its purpose. He went to work, came home, sat in his recliner, and stared at the television like it was a window he could crawl through to avoid being present. The recliner became his religion, his hiding place, his excuse. If he stayed still enough, maybe nobody would ask him to do the hard parts of being a parent. That's the kind of collapse people don't recognize until it's too late, because it doesn't make noise. It just leaves space. And space always gets filled. Blair filled it. She was 14 when Mom died, old enough to understand what was happening, and young enough to get praised for doing what should have been an adult's job. She started making dinner. She signed permission slips. She called in my dentist appointments. She learned the rhythm of the household the way a good actor learns a script, what to say, when to say it, how to make it sound like love. My father ate it up. He praised her constantly out loud like he wanted to make a monument out of her effort so he wouldn't have to look at his own absence. I don't know what I'd do without you, he'd tell her. You're keeping this family together. You're so mature. He said it in front of me like it was normal. Like it wouldn't plant something in the ground between us. I was 10. I didn't have language for it yet, but I felt the rule form Blair equals relief. Riven equals work. If Blair smiled, the house felt stable. If I had a problem, the house felt heavy. That's not a personality flaw. That's a system. Blair became the person my father could lean on without feeling guilty because leaning on her looked like gratitude instead of neglect. Nobody asked if she was okay. Nobody asked what it did to a teenager to become the parent in the room. They just clapped. And Blair learned fast that applause is a kind of currency. At first, she did things that looked helpful. She reminded me about homework. She walked me to the bus stop when it was cold. She told teachers I'd been having a hard time since Mom passed, and she did it with that perfect, concerned voice that made adults soften. The problem was, the more she helped, the smaller I got. Because her help came with a storyline attached. Riven is fragile. Riven is struggling. Riven can't handle things. And if you say it enough times, people start watching you like they expect you to fail. Then the little things started. Not big, not obvious, not the kind of thing you can point to and say, there, that's the knife. It was paper cuts. My math worksheet would be on my desk after school, and then at midnight, it would be gone. I'd wake up and tear my room apart, and Blair would appear in the doorway, calm, concerned. Did you lose it? She'd ask soft like she felt bad for me. I'd get a 0 and a lecture about responsibility. Permission slips for field trips would vanish before they got to my teacher. I'd sit in class while everyone else climbed onto the bus, and the teacher would sigh at me like I'd chosen this. Birthday invites I swore I handed out never seemed to reach anybody. Friends stopped texting back. Rumors floated around the hallways like smoke, and I couldn't find the fire. And Blair would show up again, always at the right moment to play Sister of the Year. He's still not himself, she'd tell people, head-tilted eyes shining with sympathy. Our mom died and it really messed him up. It was the smartest kind of sabotage because it didn't just isolate me. It made her look heroic for standing near the wreckage. I tried once to tell my father. I remember exactly where he was, recliner remote and hand eyes on the TV, but not really seeing it. I stood in front of him because that's what you do when you need to be heard. I told him I thought Blair was doing things, not one thing. A pattern. I told him I didn't know why, but I knew it wasn't accidents anymore. He looked up at me like I'd said something filthy. Then he said the sentence that sealed my mouth for years. You're jealous, he told me. Your sister is holding this family together. You should be grateful. Jealous. That was the stamp. Anything I said after that would be treated like bitterness, not information. And Blair heard about that conversation without me ever telling her. I know she did because the next day she brought me a snack after school, sat beside me like a saint, and said, I'm not your enemy, Z. Her voice was sweet. Her eyes weren't. I learned then that she didn't just want control over the house. She wanted control over the story of me. 2 years later, my father remarried. Cynthia came into our lives with polite smiles and tidy rules, the kind of woman who believes order is the same as love. In the beginning, she tried casseroles laundry folded just so, asking me questions, with a brightness that didn't match our grief. She wasn't cruel at first. She was uncomfortable. And discomfort can turn into resentment fast when you live with it. Blair made a decision immediately. She started calling Cynthia Mom like it cost her nothing. She did it in front of my father, in front of church ladies, in front of teachers. Every time she said it, Cynthia softened. Every time my father looked relieved, like Blair was giving him permission to move on without feeling like a traitor to my mother's memory. I couldn't do it. Not because I hated Cynthia. Because my mom had been gone 2 years and my throat wouldn't form the word without feeling like I was erasing her. Cynthia didn't interpret that as grief. She interpreted it as defiance. And Blair used that. He's still stuck, Blair would say quietly, as if she was worried about me. He doesn't want to accept a new family. Cynthia would nod and my father would frown, and suddenly my morning became evidence of a behavioral problem. The triangle formed without anyone announcing it. My father needed peace. Cynthia needed control. Blair needed power. I was the friction. And in a house that worshipped quiet, friction gets punished. Somewhere around that time, I overheard a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. It wasn't dramatic. It was half a sentence through a cracked doorway, the kind of thing your brain grabs and won't let go of because it doesn't understand it yet. I was walking past the den when I heard Blair's voice, low, careful, and my father's answering grunt. I caught the word trust. I caught when he's old enough. I caught my mother's name attached to paperwork like she was still in the room. Then the TV got louder and the words disappeared. I stood there with my heart beating too hard for a hallway. I didn't know what the trust was. I didn't know the number. I just knew there was something my mother had put in place for the future, something that existed beyond feelings, beyond who was favored on any given day. And I knew Blair had already seen it as something to manage, maybe even something to own. What made it worse was watching how Blair could switch skins. At home she could be cold, impatient, sharp as a snapped ruler. Outside she was glowing. In public, she was the grieving daughter who stepped up, the big sister who took care of the boy who couldn't cope, the kid who deserved scholarships and praise and leadership awards. Adults loved her because she made them feel like the world was still fair. Look at this brave girl overcoming tragedy, keeping her family intact. And every time they praised her, it pressed me down another inch. By the time I hit 15, I didn't just have bad luck. I had a reputation. Not because I'd earned it, but because Blair had built it carefully, brick by brick, with concerned smiles and perfectly timed sighs. I was the kid teachers watched like they expected trouble. I was the boy Cynthia talked about like I was a problem to be solved. I was the son my father didn't know how to look at without feeling guilty, so he preferred not to look at me at all. And Blair knew exactly how to use that. She'd created a world where if she ever claimed I'd done something awful, people wouldn't ask, did he do it? They'd ask, how long has it been happening? That was the groundwork. That was the trap being built long before the storm. And right when money began to shimmer at the edges of the story, right when I started noticing Blair's new clothes, her sudden cash, the way a man I'd never met started showing up in her life like he belonged there, everything shifted from petty sabotage to something with a target. Dawson Pike entered the picture like a shadow with a smile, and I didn't understand then that he wasn't just her boyfriend. He was the kind of person who turns desperation into a plan. The week before the storm, I started feeling it in the air the way you can smell lightning before it hits. I didn't know what they were setting up yet. I only knew Blair was acting sweeter than usual, Cynthia was watching me tighter than usual, and my father was more impatient than usual, like he was already tired of a conversation we hadn't even had. And when a family starts rehearsing without you, it's never for something good. The week before the storm, the house didn't feel louder. It felt staged, like everybody had been given their lines and I was the only one still improvising. Blair had been bringing Dawson Pike around more, and the first thing you noticed about Dawson wasn't his clothes or his smile. It was the way he talked, like the world owed him a payout and it was simply running late. Every sentence came with a promise baked inside it. The next deal, the next connection, the next big thing that would finally make everything worth it. He had that salesman rhythm where he could turn an empty pocket into a temporary misunderstanding. He'd sit at our kitchen table, elbows spread like he owned the place, and talk about opportunities in Charleston and Richmond, out of state, always out of reach but always close. Blair would lean toward him like a flower toward sun, and every time she did, she got sharper with the rest of us, more impatient, more quick to snap. And there was this new tone in her voice whenever money came up, less about need, more about entitlement. After everything I've done, she'd say, not even aiming it at anyone specific, just letting it hang in the air like a bill. After holding this whole family together, my father would grunt from his recliner like that was agreement. Cynthia would keep washing dishes like she didn't hear, and I would stand there feeling something crawl up the back of my neck because I knew that phrase. I'd heard it for years. Blair didn't just want credit, she wanted power that couldn't be questioned. Dawson fed that hunger like it was romantic. He'd nod and say, "You deserve better," and his eyes would flick around the room the way a man's eyes flick when he's already measuring what he can take. I didn't know Dawson well enough to hate him yet, but I knew the type. The kind who makes plans out loud so people confuse noise for substance. The kind who calls himself ambitious when what he really means is he doesn't want a job that requires a schedule. Blair ate it up because it made her feel like her life was supposed to be bigger than Briar Hollow. And if your life is supposed to be bigger, then anything standing between you and bigger becomes an obstacle. I had been an obstacle since I was 10, long before Dawson showed up. He just gave her a reason to move faster. The first real clue that something more concrete was happening didn't come from a conversation. It came from paper, One afternoon, I walked into the den to grab batteries out of the junk drawer, and Blair was at the small desk by the window flipping through a thick folder like she'd been doing it all her life. The folder wasn't hers. It was the kind of folder adults keep locked away because they think kids don't notice. She snapped it shut the second she saw me, but not before my eyes caught a few words on a page. Trust. Guardian. Before 21. I didn't understand the legal language, but I understood the shape of it. It wasn't a love letter. It was a mechanism. It was my mother reaching past death to put structure around our futures. And Blair's hands were on it like it belonged to her. That night, I replayed the words in my head until they started to feel like a threat. Guardian. Before 21. I thought about what my father had said to me 100 times whenever I needed something that required effort. You make everything harder. You exhaust this family. I started to understand how those sentences could be repurposed into something official. If a person is a problem long enough, people start looking for forms to prove it. If I could be made to look unstable, unreliable, sick, then somebody else could step in as the responsible one, the caretaker, the guardian. And if there was money attached to my name, money my mother intended for me, then the person who managed me would manage that too. The idea landed heavy in my gut because it wasn't just paranoia. It matched Blair's pattern. She didn't just want to win arguments. She wanted to control the scoreboard. Over the next few days, little moments started lining up like footprints in wet cement. I saw Blair with my father's wallet more than once, longer than anyone needs to hold a wallet. I'll handle it, she'd say whenever a bill came up, whenever Cynthia mentioned groceries, whenever my father muttered about money. She'd move through the house with the confidence of someone who'd been given keys to everything. One day around lunch, I came home early from school because a teacher had sent me to grab a form from the office and drop it at home for a signature. Blair's car wasn't in the driveway when I arrived. 10 minutes later, it was. She came in through the garage with nothing in her hands, no bags, no receipts visible. But her energy was wrong too, charged, too pleased with herself. She brushed past me like I wasn't there, went straight into my father's room, and I heard the soft click of a drawer and the whisper of paper. Cynthia glanced down the hallway, once saw Blair going in and out, then went back to wiping the counter like it was normal, like Blair had permission. The more I watched, the more one fact kept presenting itself in that house. Blair was the only one with access to the numbers. My father's PIN, his card, his signatures, Cynthia's quiet compliance. My father had handed Blair the role of financial gatekeeper years ago because it made his life easier, which meant if money ever showed up somewhere it shouldn't, Blair could blame anyone she wanted, and my father would accept it because he didn't want to admit he'd given a teenager control over his adult responsibilities. It also meant that if Blair needed cash to appear in my space, she had the simplest method in the world. She didn't need magic. She needed an ATM. And then came the morning of October 14th, a day that started so normal it still makes me mad. I woke up thinking about a quiz about whether I'd have time after school to stop by the library about nothing important. The air outside was heavy, the kind that makes you feel like rain is waiting on a signal. Cynthia made toast. My father barely looked up from his recliner. Blair was already dressed, already moving like she had somewhere to be that mattered more than this house. She asked me if I'd seen a charger. I said no. She walked down the hallway toward my room anyway. Cynthia saw it. Cynthia absolutely saw it. Blair said something casual like, "I'm just grabbing a hair tie," and Cynthia didn't challenge her because challenging Blair would have meant stepping into conflict, and Cynthia's whole philosophy was that silence was stability. I left for school with my backpack on one shoulder and my hood up against the damp air, not knowing that while I sat in class, my room was being transformed into a stage set. I stayed at school all day. I didn't cut a single class. I was in my seat when the bell rang. I answered a question in science. I passed a note to a friend. I existed in a place full of witnesses, completely unaware that those witnesses were going to become the only thing that saved me later. By the time I got home, the storm had begun to build. Not fully, but the sky had that bruised look, and the wind kept switching directions like it couldn't decide where to hit first. I stepped onto our porch and I felt it before I even opened the door, tension thick as smoke. Inside, my father was standing in the living room instead of sitting. That alone was an alarm. His face was red, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles jumped. In one fist, he held a wad of cash. In the other, empty pill bottles that looked like they'd been scraped clean of fingerprints. Blair stood right behind him with her practiced expression, concerned, wounded, noble. Cynthia hovered in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, lips pressed together like she'd been standing there rehearsing neutrality. My father didn't let me set my bag down. "Where is it?" he barked. I blinked, confused. "Where is what?" He thrust the money forward like it was evidence in court. "This," he said. "You've been taking it. Don't play dumb." Blair's voice slid in smoothly soft like a lullaby. "Dad, please don't yell. He's scared." She didn't look at me when she said it. She looked at him. She was guiding him. Then it all came at me in a pile, accusations about cash missing from his wallet, about pills, about texts. My father waved the empty bottles near my face like he expected me to recognize them. He said Blair had found them in my closet. He said Blair found money in my dresser. He said Blair had seen messages on a phone number linked to people I shouldn't be talking to. He kept saying Blair's name like it was proof by itself. Blair stood there with wet eyes and a trembling chin, performing heartbreak so convincingly you'd almost pity her if you didn't know her. Cynthia didn't say a word. I tried to speak, tried to deny it, tried to ask why he was holding empty bottles like that proved anything. But my father's eyes weren't on me the way a parent looks at a kid. They were on me the way a person looks at a problem. His mind had already been arranged into a story where I was guilty. Blair had been working on him all afternoon, feeding him fear in small doses until it felt like certainty. Fear of being judged, fear of being pitied, fear of the town talking about the Knox family having a bad kid, fear of my mother's ghost, maybe. Whatever it was, Blair knew exactly which wires to touch. When I said I didn't do any of this, my father laughed a harsh, disbelieving sound. "Of course you didn't," he snapped. "It just appeared right. The money just walked into your drawer. The pills just fell into your closet." Blair's whisper came behind him, theatrical and cruel in its softness. "Dad, he needs help." My father grabbed my backpack and threw it at my chest so hard I stumbled back. The strap cut into my shoulder. Books shifted inside like they were bracing too. Then he seized my arm and dragged me toward the door. I felt his fingers bite into skin. Cynthia didn't move. Blair watched with a look that wasn't concern anymore. It was triumph she couldn't fully hide. He yanked the door open. The first sheet of rain slapped my face like an accusation. The wind shoved cold air into the house. Thunder muttered somewhere distant warning without mercy. My father leaned close enough that I could smell his aftershave mixed with anger, and he shouted the sentence that will live in my head until the day I die. "Get out of my house, I do not need a sick daughter." He said daughter like it was a word meant to humiliate, like it was the final label that erased everything else about me. Then he shoved me onto the porch hard and the door slammed behind me. The deadbolt clicked. I stood there for a moment with rain pouring down my face, my backpack heavy against my chest, my arm burning where his fingers had been. I waited for the door to open. I waited for Cynthia to say this was too much. I waited for Blair to pretend she had a conscience. Nothing happened. So I turned around. I didn't beg. I didn't pound the door. I walked down the steps into the storm, and the sound of my sneakers hitting wet wood was the last sound of that house I ever wanted to hear again. I didn't have my phone. I didn't have money. I didn't have a coat. I had a backpack with schoolwork and a half-eaten snack, and I had a single thought that felt like a thread I could hold on to Mavis. If I could get to my grandmother, I could survive the night. Route 60 was waiting beyond our street like a long, dark line, and I started walking toward it, not knowing that the second I stepped off that porch, the clock began counting down to a call that would bleach my father's face clean. At first I told myself it was just miles. Distance. Something you could chew through one step at a time if you didn't think too hard. I aimed my body toward Route 60 because it was the only direction that made sense, the only road that could take me away from that door and toward someone who might actually care if I lived. Rain came down in sheets, soaking my hair, my clothes, my backpack. Within minutes, everything on me clung like a second skin. Water found its way into my sneakers and stayed there, cold and heavy, turning each step into something squishy and wrong. The wind kept pushing at my shoulders as if it wanted to turn me around. I kept going anyway. Route 60 at night doesn't feel like a road. It feels like a boundary. The kind of place where headlights slice the dark and disappear, where the world around you is mostly trees and wet emptiness. Cars passed without slowing, spraying water that hit me like additional punishment. I tried to keep my breathing steady, tried to focus on landmarks the way you do when you're scared, mailbox sign, curve in the road, another mailbox, anything to keep the distance from turning into infinity. My hands started to sting, then tingle, then fade. The cold moved in stages like it was taking inventory. First my fingers, then my toes, then my cheeks. The rain wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how quiet my thoughts became after a while, like my brain was conserving energy by shutting off fear. That's what people don't tell you about hypothermia. It doesn't always feel like panic. Sometimes it feels like relief, like sleep. I kept telling myself I just needed to reach Mavis's house. I pictured her porch light. I pictured the smell of coffee. I pictured her voice saying, "Get inside." I used those images like fuel. But the longer I walked, the more my body started making suggestions I didn't like. Sit down for a minute. Lean against something. Just rest your legs. It sounded so reasonable. It sounded like self-care. It sounded like the kind of thought people have right before they don't get back up. The road stretched, and at some point there were no houses anymore, just darkness and the reflective shine of wet asphalt. My teeth started chattering so hard my jaw ached. My shoulders were shaking beneath my soaked sweatshirt. I tried to clench my hands into fists to keep blood moving, but I couldn't feel my fingers well enough to know if they were actually clenched. I remember seeing a mailbox ahead, white, standing at the edge of a gravel shoulder like it was marking the boundary between safety and nothing. I thought I'll just lean there. 30 seconds. Catch my breath. Then I'll keep going. I didn't make it to the mailbox. My knees folded like someone had cut the strings. I went down hard on the gravel palms, scraping pain flaring and then fading as quickly as it came. The rain hit my face, and for a moment I watched it fascinated, as if it belonged to someone else. Headlights blurred through the curtain of water. I heard the distant hiss of tires. Then the world snapped off like a light. When the light came back, it arrived in pieces. The smell of antiseptic. A steady beep. A scratchy blanket tucked around my shoulders. My skin burning with warmth in a way that hurt like nerves waking up angry. I tried to move and my body felt heavy, uncooperative. I blinked against bright fluorescent lights and saw a woman sitting beside my bed, calm as if she belonged there. She had a rain jacket draped over the back of the chair and wet hair pulled into a tight knot. Her eyes were sharp awake, the eyes of someone who notices details other people miss. "Hey," she said quietly, like she didn't want to spook me. "There you are." My throat felt like sandpaper. "Where am I?" I managed. "Greenbrier Valley Medical," she replied. "You scared the hell out of me." I tried to lift my head and winced. "Who are you, Harper Lattimore?" she said. "I found you." "Found you." The words landed with a strange weight, like I'd been an object left behind. I swallowed. "On the road." "Yes," Harper said, and her jaw tightened. "Route 60. You were down on the shoulder. You were unconscious, soaked through cold as stone." She watched my face carefully, then asked, "How old are you?" 15, I whispered. Harper's eyes hardened in a way that made my stomach turn because that expression wasn't pity. It was anger on my behalf. "Okay," she said. "Then we're going to do this the right way." Before I could ask what she meant, the curtain rustled and a nurse came in, checked my vitals, adjusted something on the IV. Harper didn't move. She stayed planted beside me like a guard. When the nurse stepped out, Harper leaned forward. "Listen to me," she said, voice low. "I used to work Child Protective Services. A long time. I know what a kid looks like when they didn't choose to be out there. I called 911 the second I saw you. I told them you're a minor. I told them you were abandoned in a storm. Police were notified. CPS was notified. Do you understand?" My heart started to pound not from fear of trouble but from the sudden realization that this had become bigger than my father's anger, bigger than Blair's performance. "My dad," I croaked. "Your dad's about to get a phone call," Harper said, and her tone made it clear she didn't care about his comfort. "But first I need you to tell me the truth. Why were you out there with no coat, no phone, no ride?" Rain memories flashed behind my eyes like lightning. The door, the deadbolt, the word daughter like a slap, Blair's satisfied eyes, Cynthia's silence. I stared at the ceiling for a second, then forced my voice out. "He threw me out," I said, "because Blair said I stole money." She planted. My throat tightened. She planted pills. She planted cash. He believed her. Harper didn't flinch. She didn't ask if I was sure. She didn't offer a lecture about family. She just nodded once like she'd been expecting it. "All right," she said. "We're going to make sure the timeline speaks for you." I didn't understand what she meant yet, but the calm certainty in her voice did something inside me. It was the first time in my life an adult had responded to my accusations like they were information, not attitude. 3 hours after my father shoved me into that storm, his phone rang. I didn't see his face when it happened, but I can picture it because I know him. I know the way color drains out of him when reality doesn't match his story. I know the way his mouth tightens when consequences show up uninvited. Officer called, professional voice, no softness. "Mr. Knox, your son has been found unconscious on Route 60. Suspected hypothermia. He's being transported to Greenbrier Valley Medical. And Sir CPS has been notified. An investigator is already here. We need you to come in immediately, and we're going to need you to bring whatever evidence you claim you have." That last part is what would have emptied my father's face, because now the accusations weren't living in his living room. They were entering a building full of people whose jobs depended on documentation. By the time my father arrived, I was more awake, sitting propped up against pillows, shivering in waves even though the blankets were warm. Harper had moved to the side when the door opened, but she stayed in the room. A uniformed officer stood near the foot of the bed, and beside him was a woman with a clipboard and a calm expression that looked like steel wrapped in professionalism. Rosa Delgado. She introduced herself when my eyes met hers. Child Protective Services. My father walked in like he owned the space. Then he saw the uniforms, saw the clipboard, saw Harper. His steps slowed. Blair followed right behind him, cheeks, wet eyes wide, already performing. Cynthia trailed, last arms crossed, face blank. "What is this?" my father demanded, trying to sound outraged instead of afraid. "This is a family matter." Rosa didn't react to his tone. She looked at him the way a person looks at a form they're about to fill out. "A minor was found unconscious in severe weather with no coat and no phone," she said evenly. "That makes it a legal matter. We need to understand how he ended up there." Blair stepped forward immediately, voice trembling. "He's been having problems," she said. "We tried to help him. Dad tried." We found Rosa lifted a hand slightly. Not rude, just final. "I'm going to ask questions," she said. "I need direct answers. Then you can add context." She turned to my father. "What time did you last see Riven in the home?" My father hesitated. "After school," he said. "He came in, and what time?" Rosa repeated. My father blinked like he wasn't used to being pinned down by specifics. "Around 4, he muttered. Rosa wrote it down. "What time did you expel him from the home?" Blair inhaled sharply like she wanted to answer. Rosa didn't look at her. My father said, "It was raining." "I told him to leave because," what time, Rosa said again, and her voice didn't rise, but it didn't bend either. My father swallowed. "A little after 5, he said." Rosa wrote. Then she asked the questions Blair couldn't control because they weren't about morality. They were about data. "Who has access to your bank card?" Rosa asked. My father frowned. "Why does that matter?" "Because cash appeared in a minor's dresser and you are alleging theft," Rosa replied. "So we need to know who could have withdrawn that cash." My father opened his mouth, closed it. "Blair helps with bills," he admitted. Rosa's pen paused. "Does Blair know your pin silence?" Blair's eyes flicked toward Cynthia for half a second. Cynthia stared at the floor. My father's face tightened. "Yes," he said, finally. Rosa nodded once as if she'd expected that answer. She turned her attention to Blair. "When did you find the items you reported?" Blair's voice went syrupy. "Today. I was cleaning and I noticed Rosa cut in gently but firmly." "What time today?" Blair hesitated, eyes darting like she was looking for the right lie. "Midday," she said, "before he got home." Rosa wrote again. Then she asked who entered Riven's bedroom today before he came home from school. Blair's mouth parted. Cynthia's shoulders stiffened. My father looked confused, like he'd never considered that question mattered. Blair began. Rosa's gaze moved to Cynthia. "Did you see Blair enter his room?" Cynthia swallowed. She said she was borrowing something," Cynthia murmured. Rosa's eyes slid back to Blair. "What did you borrow?" Blair's face tightened for a fraction of a second before she rearranged it into concern. "A charger," she said. "A hair tie. I don't remember." "It was nothing." Rosa's expression didn't change, but I felt the room shift. This was the first time I'd ever watched Blair's script get pulled apart, not by argument, but by sequence. Who, when, where, how. Every question forced her to choose a specific lie instead of floating on vague emotion. My father tried to reclaim control. "You don't understand," he insisted. "He's been." The officer at the foot of the bed spoke for the first time. "Sir, your son was found unconscious in hazardous conditions. That's not a discipline issue anymore." Blair's eyes flashed with panic and she covered it fast, turning it into tears. "We were trying to help him," she whispered. Rosa looked at me then directly. "Riven," she said, voice steady. "Do you feel safe returning to that home tonight?" My throat tightened. The word safe felt unreal. I glanced at my father, at Blair, at Cynthia. I saw the porch again. The deadbolt, the rain. "No," I said. "I don't." Rosa nodded. "All right," she said. "Then we're not sending you back." That's when the door opened again, and the air in the room changed. My grandmother, Mavis Calder, stepped in like a force of nature in a raincoat. She's not tall, but she doesn't need height. Her presence is enough. She took one look at my father and positioned herself between him and my bed without hesitation. "That's my grandson," she said, voice flat and dangerous. "You don't touch him." My father tried to protest. "Mavis, you don't know what." "Oh, I know exactly what you are," she snapped. Then she looked at Rosa. "What do we do to keep him out of that house tonight?" Rosa's tone softened, slightly respectful. "Emergency placement," she said. "If you're willing, we can pursue temporary guardianship through the court." Mavis didn't blink. "I'm willing," she said, "and I want it tonight." She turned to the nurse. "Get me whoever I need to sign, and get me a phone." The nurse hesitated, startled. Mavis's stare solved it. The nurse left. My father's face went pale in a new way. "You can't just take him," he said, but his voice lacked conviction now because there were uniforms and clipboards and procedure wrapping around his authority like chains. Mavis leaned in close enough that only he could hear, but I heard anyway because the room was quiet. "You threw him into a storm," she said. "You don't get to pretend you're the injured party." Rosa stepped slightly aside and spoke into her phone, quiet but quick arranging things. I caught a name when she said it. Miles Keene. Lawyer. After-hours emergency contact. The kind of person Mavis didn't call unless she was going to war. When Rosa finished the call, she looked at me again. "I'm going to request bank records and surveillance," she said. "First thing in the morning. I'm going to lock down the timeline." She glanced at Blair without emotion. "Because what you presented tonight has a lot of moving parts, and moving parts leave trails." Blair's lips parted, but no sound came out. Cynthia stared at the wall. My father looked like a man watching his world become paperwork. Mavis squeezed my hand carefully, like she was reminding me my body was real and still here. "You're coming home with me," she said. I wanted to cry. I wanted to sleep for a year. Mostly I wanted the rain to stop living inside my bones. As they prepared the discharge plan and the emergency placement forms, Rosa's voice stayed in my head, calm and precise. We're going to lock down the timeline. For the first time, Blair's power wasn't in her performance. It was in whether her story could survive timestamps. And as I lay there under harsh hospital lights, shivering, exhausted, alive, I understood something that made my stomach flip with fear and hope at the same time. The real fight was just beginning, and this time it wouldn't be won by whoever cried best. Living at my grandmother Mavis's house felt like being reintroduced to rules that actually existed to keep someone alive. The first 2 days after the hospital, nothing happened except recovery. Eat, drink water, sit near the heater until the shaking stopped. Sleep without fear of being woken up by shouting. Mavis didn't ask questions right away. She understood something most adults never did when I was a kid: a body comes before a story. Only after my skin stopped burning with leftover cold did she slide a yellow legal pad across the kitchen table and say, "Now we write it down." Not feelings, not explanations. Facts. Time. Sequence. Words said exactly as spoken. Miles Keene arrived that afternoon, rain still clinging to his coat, carrying a thin briefcase that looked like it had seen too many nights like this. He spoke to me the way professionals rarely do to kids, directly, without softening or condescension. "Memory is unreliable when it's emotional," he said, clicking his pen. "Paper isn't. We turn what you remember into a record." So I did. I wrote when I left the house. I wrote what my father held in his hands. I wrote the sentence he screamed at me, word for word. I wrote the direction I walked, the road named the mailbox I never reached. I wrote until my wrist hurt. Somewhere in the middle of that process, something snapped into place. I remembered the school day clearly. The attendance system, the electronic check-in, the teacher who joked about the quiz. I wasn't floating through the afternoon like Blair implied. I was documented. Miles looked up sharply when I said that. "That's not a detail," he said. "That's a backbone." Rosa Delgado didn't waste time. By the next morning, she had subpoenas moving like dominoes. The bank first, then the convenience store, then the pharmacy. She called me once, brief, precise. "The cash in your drawer," she said. It came from a single ATM withdrawal. Same day, same amount. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I already knew where that sentence was going. 2 hours later, she called again. "We have camera footage." This time I sat down. The bank's security video wasn't cinematic. It wasn't dramatic. It was brutal in its simplicity. Blair's face, Blair's jacket, Blair's posture, Blair's car visible behind her. Time-stamped. Rosa overlaid it with my school's attendance log and my teacher's written confirmation that I was present until dismissal. 2 truths occupying the same minute. One of them had to break. It wasn't mine. When Rosa said she withdrew the money herself, I didn't feel triumph. I felt something colder. Confirmation. The kind that tells you this wasn't chaos. It was design. The next stop was the convenience store. Rosa requested footage from the day the prepaid phone had been purchased. The store clerk remembered Blair because she'd paid cash and argued about the activation fee. The camera remembered her better. Same car, same dent in the bumper, same athletic ponytail. The receipt time-stamped days before the storm. Rosa laid it out like a grid on Mavis's table. Bank, store, school. Everything lined up except Blair's story. That's when I understood something fundamental. She wasn't sloppy. She was confident. She'd never expected anyone to look at time itself. The pharmacy came next, and that's where the story cracked wider. The pill bottles found in my room traced back to a prescription under Dawson Pike's name. Anxiety medication. Legitimately prescribed. But the loss report had been filed days after I was thrown out, not before. Rosa didn't have to explain why that mattered. If the pills were already missing and hidden in my room, they would have been reported missing immediately. The delay meant only one thing. The report was part of the cover, not the origin. Rosa leaned back in her chair and said quietly, "This is staging." And with that word, the narrative jumped tracks. This wasn't a family misunderstanding. This was preparation. Once Rosa started digging into finances beyond that single withdrawal, the scale changed. She found small transfers, checks written out of sequence, amounts just small enough not to trigger alarms. Over months, over years. Money bleeding out of my father's account into ventures tied to Dawson's projects. The total was staggering compared to the few $100s planted in my drawer. When Rosa said the number, Mavis closed her eyes. Miles exhaled slowly, and I felt sick not because of the money but because of what it meant. I hadn't been framed just to remove me. I had been framed to protect a much larger theft. I wasn't the problem. I was the shield, the distraction, the one person whose removal would silence questions. That realization rewrote my entire childhood in a single stroke. Blair hadn't escalated because she was cruel. She'd escalated because she was cornered. Miles didn't sugarcoat it. From this point on, he said, we're not talking about custody disputes. We're talking about criminal exposure. Rosa nodded. Then she added one sentence that pushed everything into free fall. Another state has inquiries open on Dawson Pike. Investment fraud. If he gets picked up, he won't stay quiet. The room went very still. I understood exactly what that meant. Blair's confidence wasn't just arrogance anymore. It was urgency. And people who act out of urgency make mistakes. Briar Hollow is the kind of town where news doesn't travel fast, but it travels everywhere. Blair moved before the paperwork could. She didn't wait for hearings or reports. She went straight to the one arena she understood best: people. Suddenly there were whispers. That I was unstable. That CPS had been misled. That my grandmother had always hated my father and finally got her revenge. I could feel eyes on me when Mavis took me to the grocery store. I could hear conversations pause when I walked past. Blair knew exactly which buttons to press because she'd spent years installing them. And for a moment it worked. Doubt is easier than evidence when you don't want to believe something ugly about someone you've praised. Then the message came. No name. Just a sentence sent to Mavis's phone. Stop pushing this, or people will remember what kind of kid he really is. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. It wasn't a threat of violence. It was worse. It was an attempt to erase me again. Miles took the phone, screenshot everything, and said calmly, "Good. This helps us." He explained how intimidation mattered, how pressure revealed motive, how silence was never the right response when someone tried to scare you into it. My father tried to come around next, calls at odd hours, messages that sounded caring on the surface and panicked underneath. He said he was worried. He said he missed me. He said we should talk privately. Miles shut that down immediately. No direct contact, he said. Not for your safety. For the record. Every unanswered call stacked evidence higher. Watching my father flail wasn't satisfying. It was clarifying. He wasn't trying to protect me now. He was trying to protect himself. Cynthia started to crack under the weight of it all. She didn't suddenly become brave or righteous, but her certainty dissolved. She stopped defending Blair outright. She started asking Rosa questions she should have asked years earlier. That hesitation mattered. In therapy, fragments started surfacing. Not new memories. Old ones finally allowed to speak. I remembered Blair in my room that morning holding something small, cylindrical. I couldn't swear what it was, but the image stuck. Miles wrote it down not as proof, but as alignment. Something to be tested against other facts. That was the difference now. Nothing stood alone. Everything waited to be confirmed. Rosa and Miles tightened the perimeter. Preservation orders. Data holds. Updated protective measures. A teacher came forward unprompted to confirm my attendance. A neighbor mentioned seeing Blair's car near the bank midday. Small confirmations. Unremarkable by themselves. Devastating together. Blair's story was no longer cracking. It was collapsing inward. The call came late. Rosa's voice was steady, but I could hear the weight behind it. Dawson Pike has been detained for questioning in another state, she said. It's not public yet. Miles looked at me across the table and didn't soften his words. If Dawson talks, everything changes. The hearing becomes something else entirely. I nodded, feeling the truth settle. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about exposure. And I knew with a certainty that didn't scare me at all that nothing Blair had built could survive the light that was coming. The morning of the hearing pulled me backward in time so hard my body forgot how old I was. I was 15 again before I even reached the courthouse steps. My hands were cold in a way that had nothing to do with weather, my stomach hollowed out like it had been scooped clean, and every sound felt sharper than it should have. The hallway outside the courtroom smelled like paper, old polish, and nerves. Lawyers murmured, shoes echoed. Doors opened and closed with a finality that made my shoulders tense every time. I kept thinking of the porch, the rain, the deadbolt clicking shut. And for a moment, it felt like the same mechanism was about to snap again, only this time I wouldn't be the one left outside. My grandmother stood beside me, steady as a post sunk deep into the ground. She didn't tell me to be brave. She didn't tell me to forgive. She leaned close and said, "You don't perform today. You don't persuade. You just keep the truth straight in your head. Timeline. That's all." Miles Keene repeated it in his own language, quieter, sharper. This was technically a guardianship hearing. That was the door we walked through. But if the evidence held that door would open into something much larger, something neither my father nor Blair could step out of once it began moving. Right before the bailiff called us in, Miles's phone vibrated. He stepped a few feet away, listened, then looked back at us with an expression I hadn't seen before, not triumph, not relief, but readiness. He told us in a low voice that Dawson Pike had been formally arrested in another state that morning. Investment fraud, multiple counts. And within hours of being taken in, Dawson had asked about cooperation. He wanted leverage. He wanted time. Miles immediately requested permission to supplement the record. The axis of the day shifted in that moment. What was supposed to be about where I would live became about why I'd nearly died. Inside the courtroom, the air felt heavier. The judge began with neutral questions, procedural controlled. Rosa Delgado laid out the facts without emotion. A minor expelled from his home during severe weather, found unconscious on a public road, hospitalized with hypothermia, placed under emergency care. My father sat stiffly at the defense table, jaw-locked, eyes forward. Blair sat beside him, posture perfect, hands folded, already wearing the expression she'd practiced, concerned, wounded, reasonable. Cynthia was there too, quieter than usual, eyes flicking between faces like she was trying to calculate where safety had moved. When my father's attorney spoke, the old narrative came out almost unchanged. I was troubled. The family was overwhelmed. They had tried. Blair had tried the hardest. Listening to it felt like watching someone read from a script I'd memorized against my will. But this time, the script didn't land in a living room. It landed under oath. Miles stood and introduced the first set of records: bank statements, surveillance stills, school attendance logs. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't editorialize. He placed times on the table and let them collide. The cash found in my room came from a single ATM withdrawal. The timestamp was clear. The person at the machine was clear. It was Blair. At the exact time of the withdrawal, I was in class, electronically marked present, corroborated by a teacher. The judge looked directly at Blair and asked her to explain the discrepancy. For the first time, Blair hesitated in a way she couldn't mask. She tried to pivot, suggesting someone else had used her card, her car, her access. But the explanation required a second lie to support the first, and the second lie required a third. Each answer created a new hole. The courtroom didn't react loudly. It reacted with stillness, the kind that means people are paying attention. Then came the convenience store footage, the prepaid phone, the receipt, the purchase days before the storm. Miles didn't accuse. He asked questions. Why buy a phone if it wasn't for contact related to the alleged problem? Why did messages from that phone target me specifically? Why did the activity cluster around the same window as the money and the pills? Blair answered. But each answer bent her further away from plausibility. Rosa followed with technical questions that stripped away tone and left only sequence. When did the phone activate? When did the messages send? When did the items appear in my room? Blair tried to keep up. Time did not cooperate. The judge allowed the introduction of Dawson Pike's cooperation statement. It wasn't theatrical. It was read into the record, clipped and procedural. Dawson confirmed that the plan originated with Blair, that the goal was to frame me as unstable and unfit so guardianship over my trust could be redirected, that the staged evidence served two purposes: removing me and covering a much larger pattern of financial theft from my father. He confirmed messages. He confirmed timing. He confirmed that Blair had said everything was in position the afternoon before the storm. Cynthia was called next. She looked like someone walking into water she'd been avoiding for years. Under oath, silence stopped being an option. She was asked simple questions. Did she see Blair enter my room the morning of the storm? She said yes. Did she hear Blair on the phone later that day saying words to the effect of everything being ready? Cynthia closed her eyes briefly, then said yes. Her voice was small, but it didn't waver. That single admission locked the chain together camera phone testimony timing. The judge turned to my father, asked why, if he truly believed money had been stolen, he hadn't checked statements before acting. Why he hadn't called the school. Why he'd expelled a minor into a storm rather than separate and verify. My father spoke about exhaustion, about grief, about trusting the child who seemed capable. He admitted he hadn't checked anything. He admitted he'd made the decision in anger. He admitted he'd told me to leave. The judge didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She stated plainly that abandonment doesn't require intent to harm, only a reckless disregard for safety. When the ruling came, it felt both decisive and inevitable. Guardianship remained with my grandmother, moving toward permanence. Contact restrictions expanded. The record was referred onward for criminal review. As we stood to leave, Miles leaned toward me and said something that didn't feel like strategy at all. He said legal victories don't automatically untangle emotional ones. Some doors close by force. Others close only when you decide to stop standing in them. The months after the hearing were quieter but not simple. The court's orders created structure where chaos had lived. Blair was barred from contacting me directly or indirectly. Her attempts to rewrite the story one last time, to paint herself as manipulated to push everything onto Dawson, collapsed under the weight of documented actions that belonged solely to her. The consequences were practical and lasting. Financial oversight restrictions, charges that followed her name, doors that closed without announcement. My father lost custody, and with it the authority he'd mistaken for stability. He was ordered to contribute to my care and treatment. Cynthia drifted away from the center of everything, no longer protected by silence, no longer certain where she stood. In a town like Briar Hollow, reputations don't shatter all at once. They erode. People who had praised Blair began avoiding eye contact. People who had trusted my father began speaking his name more carefully. The thing he'd feared most, public shame, arrived not with shouting, but with distance. I rebuilt quietly. New school. Therapy that taught me how to separate memory from blame. My grandmother's house ran on consistency, meals at set times, homework at the table, lights out when sleep mattered. I learned to document my life the way Miles had taught me, not because I was afraid anymore, but because evidence is a form of self-respect. I grew up understanding something fundamental: truth doesn't defend itself. It has to be organized. Years later, the letter arrived. Chicago rain on the window. My grandmother's kitchen table, again older but unchanged. My father was in a care facility now. A stroke had taken pieces of him. He wanted to see me. The request sat between us like an unresolved sentence. I went because I needed the ending to belong to me. Cedar Grove Care Center smelled of antiseptic and old time. My father looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, his voice slower. He apologized in fragments, some sincere, some helpless. I listened without interrupting. Then I told him what mattered. That forgiveness didn't mean return. That understanding didn't erase consequences. That he'd chosen the easier belief because it let him avoid grief. I left when the conversation stopped serving truth. In the hallway, a nurse mentioned that Blair had come once. That my father had refused to see her. He couldn't look at her without seeing what he'd done. The reversal was complete. but it brought no satisfaction. Only clarity. I walked out into October sunlight. Same month. Different life. I went back to Chicago, to the home I'd built, to a future defined by choice instead of weather. Some storms don't destroy you. They remove you from places that never meant to keep you safe, so you can finally learn what safety feels like when it's real. There are moments in life that don't end when the event is over. They stretch forward quietly, shaping how you breathe, how you trust, how you decide whether a room feels safe or not. For a long time, I thought surviving that night was the hardest part. I was wrong. Living afterward, learning how not to flinch at raised voices, how not to apologize for existing, how not to brace myself for doors slamming, took far longer. What happened to me didn't just teach me what cruelty looks like. It taught me how easily cruelty can hide behind words like family responsibility and good intentions. It taught me that silence isn't neutral. Silence always chooses a side. And most of all, it taught me that truth isn't loud by default. It doesn't win just because it deserves to. It wins only when someone is willing to hold it steady long enough for others to really see it. For years, I carried a quiet fear that if people knew everything, every detail, every accusation, every mistake made around me, they would decide I was too complicated, too damaged, too much trouble. That fear kept me small. It kept me careful. It kept me polite when I should have been honest. What I learned slowly and painfully is that the right people don't ask you to simplify your pain so they can digest it more easily. They don't rush you toward forgiveness to make themselves comfortable. They don't tell you to move on when the wound is still open. The right people sit with you in the discomfort and let the story exist in its full weight. They understand that healing isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about no longer letting it define your worth. If you're listening to this and parts of it feel familiar, I want you to know something clearly. What happened to you matters, even if no one protected you the way they should have. Even if the people who were supposed to stand up for you chose convenience over courage. Even if the truth took years to come out or never fully did. Your experience doesn't need to be validated by a courtroom or a confession to be real. You are not weak because it still affects you. You are not broken because it shaped you. You are still here, and that alone means more than you've probably ever given yourself credit for. Sharing this story isn't about reopening old wounds for drama or attention. It's about refusing to let silence be the final chapter. It's about creating space for conversations people avoid because they're uncomfortable, messy, and inconvenient. Abuse, manipulation, neglect, they don't always look the way movies portray them. Sometimes they wear calm voices. Sometimes they arrive disguised as concern. Sometimes they happen slowly enough that you don't realize you're drowning until you're already underwater. If telling my story helps even one person recognize what's happening to them or realize they're not alone in what they've survived, then it's worth every second of vulnerability it costs me. And that's where my story rests. Not with everything perfectly healed, not with every wound erased, but with something quieter. A sense of being whole again. As we listen to stories like this, maybe we start to see that life rarely gives us clean endings. What it gives us are chances to choose kindness over bitterness, clarity over silence, and understanding over blame. Sometimes survival isn't about winning or losing. It's about learning how to keep your heart open without letting the past keep control of it. When we look back together, we might realize that many of us carry moments we never talk about. Doors that closed too hard. Words that stayed with us longer than they should have, and yet here we are, still moving forward, still learning how to be gentle with others and with ourselves. If this story stirred something in you, you're not alone in that feeling. Stories have a way of finding the people who need them right when they're ready to listen. If you feel comfortable, you're welcome to leave a few lines in the comments, whatever feels right. Maybe where you're listening from, or maybe just a quiet thought you'd like to share. And if you'd like to be part of a space where we listen to stories like this together, you can subscribe and stay with us. Not as an obligation, but as a way of sitting down side by side and reminding each other that being heard still matters. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for listening with an open heart. Take care of yourself wherever you are, and I'll see you again in the next story.